Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Tax Professionals Podcast. Regardless of what area of tax you work in, it's absolutely paramount that you have a strong knowledge of the area of tax you work in. The end goal should not be to know the answer to every tax question immediately. That's impossible given the amount of tax legislation, but having a good foundation will mean you have a good gut feeling of what the answer will be and will allow you to spot potential risks before things turn ugly. Tax research can then be undertaken as necessary to ratify the position and the appropriate consideration given to any risks. Think what you will, but I personally take a lot of pride in my tax knowledge and I've worked hard to build it. When it comes to my reviews and appraisals, it's that area that I'm most complimented on. So, in this episode, I'm sharing with you the strategies and methods that I, myself, have and still use to build and maintain my tax knowledge so that you can use these yourself. Whether you're new to working in tax, have decided to swap specialism, or are more experienced and are looking for ways to bolster and maintain your knowledge, I think you'll take away some useful points and ideas from this episode. Let's get to it. Probably the most obvious way to gain tax knowledge is to study towards a professional qualification such as the ATT or CTA qualification. What a lot of people do in this situation is just study sheerly to pass the exams and get the qualification. However, in my personal opinion, that's a mistake and doesn't allow you to get the most benefit out of studying towards the qualification. Obviously, you want to pass the exams and obtain the qualification, but there's so much more that you can get out of doing the professional qualification. When I was personally doing my exams, I was thinking about my career in the long term, and I wanted to make sure that I built myself a strong knowledge on which I could use to then build my career. Here are some ideas of the things that you can do. When studying, study with the intention to understand the tax rules that you're studying, not just to be able to pass an exam question. I know a lot of people will, especially when it comes to revising for exams, is just do practice questions over and over again, ones that apply the exact same method. Whilst that's helpful for passing the exam question itself, what about if the circumstances are slightly different to that of the question? By just doing questions over and over again, you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to learn about those different scenarios. So, my personal tip here is to make sure that you fully understand the material before you start undertaking lots of practice questions. When studying, be an active learner. By that, I mean don't just read the study materials over and over again, or just listen to your lecturer talk. Think about what's actually being said. Ask yourselves questions about the material. Answer those questions, or if you can't come to the answer yourself, ask for support with it. By doing this, you're engaging with the material and the rules so that you make sure that you fully understand them. The reason I think this is so important is because when it comes to the actual job in real life, there's plenty of situations and scenarios that don't just fit that standard exam question. By understanding the rules and not just doing practice questions over and over again, you'll be more likely to be able to apply the rules to the circumstances that you're given. This makes you a much more versatile advisor than you would be if you just did practice questions when it came to studying for exams. Another tip is when you're studying, think about the information and rules you're learning and see whether you can apply them to any of the situations that you've seen at work. This will help you to make sure that you understand the rules and also make sure that you can apply the rules to practical situations at the job. Theory is useful, but you also need to be able to use it practically. The last tip I have for you in this section is to take studying towards the professional qualifications as a great opportunity to understand and learn how to use legislation properly. A lot of people are intimidated and put off by legislation. They know they can pass the exams without really using it, so a lot of people will do that. However, being able to use the legislation is a great practical skill for the job itself. Seize the opportunity when taking the exams to learn how to use the tax legislation properly. Trust me, you won't regret it. Talking of seizing opportunities, one thing I recommend is seizing the opportunities to research, to learn and to work on projects at work. Let me explain what I mean by this. Starting with research, let's say you've been asked to find the answer to the question with the facts XYZ. So you've gone away and you found the answer to the circumstances with those facts. Great, job done. However, you can be a little bit more curious and try and find the answer to the question if the circumstances were changed slightly. What about if they were A, B, C instead of X, Y, Z? What would the answer be then? Would it be the same? Would it be different? How would it be different? These are all questions you can ask yourself and try and find the answer to, and by doing them it will help build your tax knowledge. This is something that I would do all the time when I was junior. Sometimes my manager would joke that I should just leave it and let it go, but I always tried to find the answers anyway. There was this one time when I needed to undertake some research to understand the national insurance treatment for an expat travelling between the UK and China. I knew very little about national insurance treatment for people travelling between the UK and other countries at the time. When I was undertaking research, I found out that the answer depended on whether or not the person was travelling to countries that were in Europe or outside of Europe. So what I could have done is stop there after finding the answer to the question where the person is travelling to China. However, I took the opportunity to also learn about the rules that would apply if the person was travelling to Europe instead, because I knew the answer to that question as well. It's always much easier to remember something and build your knowledge when you're applying it to an actual scenario, rather than just learning it theoretically like you do in exams. That's why I think this tip is so powerful. Now, I'm not saying that every single time you undertake a bit of tax research that you should start trying to find the answer to different questions too. However, doing this every now and then is a great way to build your tax knowledge. So, be curious and sometimes dig deeper when you're doing research than is necessary to answer the question. Another way that you can seize opportunities is in relation to certain projects that are going on at work. Let's say a new project has come in and it's in relation to an area of tax that you've not yet been able to work on from a practical perspective. You may be asked to work on the project, which is great if that happens, and you should definitely take the opportunity. But let's say you're not. What you could do in this situation is ask to be involved in the project. Even if it's not to be involved fully within the project, maybe you could just be involved with a few things on the edges. Even that would definitely help you to build and improve your tax knowledge. One thing I would always do after working on a project for the first time is ask for feedback from the people you've worked with afterwards. You can ask for feedback in relation to lots of different areas, but one area where I definitely ask for the feedback is in relation to the technical tax knowledge. Did you demonstrate that you understood the rules? Were your conclusions correct in relation to the circumstances given? Those are just some ideas, but hopefully you get the picture. If you're interested in learning more about how you can obtain good feedback, you can go and listen to the episode in relation to that. Link will be in the show notes. The next way you can build and improve your tax knowledge is by reading tax news and tax magazines. In my first tax job, one of my responsibilities was to make sure that I let the team know of any new tax updates and any tax news. I would do this by reading tax magazines and tax news. This was one of the tasks on my to-do list that seemed like a chore, and I would try to avoid doing it where possible. I much preferred working on client projects, as I found that much more enjoyable. I definitely didn't realise how useful it was for me to check the news and magazines regularly at the time. But looking back, it was a great way for me to start building my tax knowledge in relation to the area I worked in, and also just building my general awareness of tax. Now, I still check tax news a couple of days a week, and also try to always read the Tax Advisor magazine each month. There's no need to read every single article in a magazine or every single piece of tax news that comes out. I recommend that you read articles that are directly in relation to the area of tax you work in, then also any other articles that take your interest. That way, you're building knowledge that's directly relevant to your job, but also building your more general awareness of tax, which is helpful too. In the professional qualification section, I've already talked about being an active reader rather than just reading it mindlessly. When it comes to reading articles in both the news and magazines, the more active you can be when reading, the more useful it will be to you. So, be an active reader more often to get more benefit out of the news and magazine articles that you read. This will help you to build your tax knowledge. In terms of magazines, the two that I would recommend reading are the Tax Advisor magazine, which is produced by the Chartered Institute of Taxation, and also the Taxation magazine. They both cover very similar material, but in slightly different ways. There's no need to read both of them, although that would obviously be more beneficial, but I definitely recommend picking one of them and reading that one regularly. You could always try both and see which one you prefer. You may be thinking that reading a tax magazine will take up a lot of time. If you're reading the whole thing from back to front, then yes, it definitely would take a lot of time. So, if you don't want to dedicate all that time to read the whole magazine from back to front, then what you should do is pick the articles that are relevant to you and a couple that also interest you as well. In terms of places where you can check tax news, there's lots of different sources. If you work for an advisory firm, there's a good chance you'll have access to a subscription of tax news. That would definitely be a good resource to use. You can also look on the government website restricting the news to just HMRC or the Treasury. Although this is less credible, another way you can keep up to date with tax news is to use LinkedIn and connect with people who work in the area of tax that you work in. There are plenty of people out there that post regular updates on LinkedIn in relation to tax changes. Use it to your advantage. I could keep listing more useful places to check the tax news, but what I'll do instead is I'll put links in the show notes. Another great way to build your tax knowledge is to read case law. Just like tax legislation, I think people find tax law intimidating and scary. Within the first 12 months of me working my first tax job, I was asked to undertake some particular case law research. When I was asked to do this, I initially had no idea what case law was. None at all, but for some reason I didn't feel like I could ask what it was. I thought it was something that everyone knew about, and so, rather than ask, I just started doing the research myself. So, for those of you that don't know, case law is basically the outcome of a court case, a dispute between HMRC and the taxpayer. The dispute is usually in relation to one or a few tax points. The tax law research that I got asked to do was in relation to HMRC's information gathering powers. HMRC wanted to directly access one of our clients' computers and extract information directly from it. We were pretty confident that they didn't have the power in law to do this. However, the officer we were dealing with wouldn't back down. So, I was asked to undertake case law research to substantiate an argument that defended that HMRC could not directly access our client's computer. When I was doing this, I realised that case law is such a rich source of information. It would tell you the facts of the case, basically what's being disputed. It would tell you exactly what the legislation says and where to find it. It would give you HMRC's view and arguments in relation to the point being disputed, and it will also give you the taxpayer's view, which is usually given by a barrister arguing rather than the taxpayer directly, but you get the point. Therefore, straight away you get two different interpretations on the same point. On top of that, case law will usually refer to other cases that have already been ruled in the past. That's even more useful information. At the end of the case, it will also give the judge's ruling along with justification as to how they reach their conclusion. As I say, that is such a rich source of information. Hopefully you agree. What you could do if you have the time is aim to read one tax case a week or maybe just a couple a month. Even just reading a few cases will greatly improve your tax knowledge. Some good places to source tax case law are the First Tier Tribunal's website. The First Tier Tribunal has a section on its website that lists all the cases along with the case transcripts. Another great place to find case law is a website called Bailey. There will be links to both of these in the show notes. One last good place to find out about tax case law is the Taxation magazine. The Taxation magazine has a section in it that's solely in relation to case law. The magazine includes short summaries of recent cases, as well as lets you know where you can find the full case transcripts if you'd like to read that. So, one way I've already mentioned that you can build your tax knowledge is to read tax news and read tax magazines. Just want to make a standalone point though, that you should definitely make sure that you're aware of all changes in relation to the area of tax that you work in, and make sure that you learn and understand these changes. You'll be able to learn and understand these changes much easier than you would in relation to historic changes. That's because you're living through these changes and that just helps them to stick. Learn them and know them well. Whenever there's a new tax change, there will be a consultation in relation to it. There's lots of different stages of a consultation, but if you follow a consultation from start to finish, you'll get all the following information. You'll get explanations of the current law and reasons why the changes are necessary. You will get to see the proposals put forward along with questions in relation to these proposals. There will also be an outcome of the consultation, and this will state what all the changes are going to be. There will also be draft legislation and draft guidance before the final versions are released. Just like with case law, this is a rich source of information. Following a consultation from start to finish will definitely help build and improve your tax knowledge. My last piece of advice for this episode is to discuss and debate tax law, tax changes, tax rules, you name it, discuss all of them. All of the other tips include a lot of reading, so this would definitely give a break from that. You could discuss or debate literally anything. You could discuss a tax article you've read, you could discuss a piece of legislation or an interpretation, you could discuss case law. It doesn't really matter what you're discussing and debating, but I personally find whenever I do this, it helps something stick in my mind and helps me to understand it better. You will also get different perspectives on something, and that is always a useful thing, along with instant feedback, because if someone else disagrees with your point, they will let you know. Along with improving and building your tax knowledge, it will also help improve your verbal communication and explanation skills too. What's not to like? That wraps up all the advice and tips that I have in relation to how to improve and maintain your tax knowledge. The key points are: when studying towards a professional qualification, learn with the intention to use the knowledge on the job and not just to pass exams. Seize and seek out opportunities to research in detail, learn and work on projects that will build your knowledge. When it comes to reading, whether it be tax news, case law or magazines, be an active reader. Read articles that are relevant to the area of tax you work in and also any of those that interest you. I've said this numerous times in the episode, but tax cases are a rich source of information and reading them will really help improve and build your tax knowledge. Make sure you fully understand and learn any changes in relation to the area of tax you work in. Use the consultations, draft legislation, draft guidance and also the final versions once these are released. Discuss and debate areas of tax in relation to any of the areas already mentioned above. Tax news, tax magazines, case law, you name it, you can discuss it. That's it for this episode. I'll pull together a list of resources mentioned in this episode which can be found in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP6. TTPP6 stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, Episode 6. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points that you can use to improve and develop your tax career. Until next time.